years ago, my family went to eat at a really, really nice restaurant. We were on vacation in New Orleans, which, by the way, I could never live in New Orleans. The food there is too good, and I would weigh 8,000 pounds if I lived in New Orleans. So we go to this amazing restaurant, and it was at a fancy hotel right off of Bourbon Street in New Orleans. And my family's there. I believe I was about 19 years old at the time, and so my brother and sister are there. They're both in high school. So we go eat at this fancy restaurant, and my brother eats lobster bisque for the very first time. And so while we're in the restaurant, we're enjoying ourselves, having a great time. I mean, it really is a fancy, fancy meal. And so my brother eats the lobster bisque, and he ends up getting sick to the point that he throws up in the middle of the restaurant. Now, just so you know, we weren't like indoors. It was in like this courtyard area outside, but he throws up right there in the middle of the restaurant. Sadly, my sister and I were not very nice to my brother that day. We start laughing at what's happening. Don't do that. That's not a very good idea. But we start laughing at my brother as he's enduring this. And so my mom is like, "You two should be ashamed of yourselves." And she takes my brother upstairs, and my dad and my sister and I are left downstairs to kind of navigate this situation. So anyway, while we're sitting there, the manager from the restaurant comes up, sees what's happened, and he says, "Oh, this is awful. This is most unfortunate for what has taken place here today." We thought he was going to clean it up. Instead, he goes and he walks to someone else on the other side of the restaurant and clearly asks them to clean it up. That person walks over, sees the mess that's been made, and then says, "Oh, I'm just so sorry this has happened," and then pulls out his radio and begins to call for someone else to come and clean it up. We watched this song and dance happen with like 5 different people. Nobody wanted to be the one to clean up the mess that was on the floor until finally a person showed up with a mop, looked at us, and then cleaned it up. I mean, you could clearly tell that person had no one to pass it down the chain to clean up what had happened there in the restaurant. So all this to say, when you fully engage with people, you're going to get the good, the bad, and the ugly of their lives. And when we have that experience, it can be a deal where we want to help people, we want to pray for them, but we don't necessarily want to get our hands dirty. As a disciple, when you see a need, when you engage with the people around you, and when you truly begin to pray for them and intercede on their behalf, it is a natural jump in your spiritual walk to desire to be God's hands and feet in their situation. Jesus says it this way in Mark 9:35. "If anyone wants to be first, he must be the very last and the servant of all." Leadership and servanthood are 2 things that absolutely go hand in hand. Remember that I said this. A disciple refuses to hide behind chain of command. Let me say that again. A disciple refuses to hide behind chain of command. If there is something that needs to be done, we are willing and able as followers of Jesus Christ to jump in and to help people through their struggle. The best example that Jesus gives of this, I believe, is in the story of the Good Samaritan. Jesus tells the story of a person who is beat up by robbers and left naked and bleeding on the road between Jerusalem and Jericho. Can I tell you why Jerusalem and Jericho is important? Jesus is saying he was beat up and left for dead on the middle of the highway. This is not just some backwoods road or some farm to market. On the road from Jerusalem to Jericho would have been basically like the interstate of its time. In the middle of I-95 or I-35, this man is naked and bleeding, a place where he could receive help if someone would just stop. Jesus says all of a sudden a priest begins to walk down that road and sees the person naked and bleeding. The priest is symbolic of someone who is a professional God-fearer. He sees the person naked and bleeding on the side of the road, but chooses to move to the other side. He then ups the ante and says someone who's a Levite. This is someone who not only was a professional Christ follower, but or a professional Yahweh fearer, but this is someone who was born for this very task. The Levites were born for moments just like this one. And yet, he passed by on the other side of the road. Jesus then twists the knife a little bit. He says, then a Samaritan stopped by. The Samaritan is symbolic of someone who had no financial, no background reason for them to help, and yet, because their fellow man was suffering, He stops, puts the man on his own donkey, and then takes him to a place of safety where he cares for his needs. To hear someone's story, to see their struggle, to pray for them and intercede on their behalf is all the launching point for us being the hands and feet of Jesus Christ to the world around us. What I'm going to ask you to do this week is to get your hands dirty. These people that you've been listening to, seeing, and praying for, I'm going to ask you this week that you would find some way to act on their behalf in the name Jesus Christ. This is going to give you some amazing stories, but it will also open you up to some amazing heartache as well. When we give, Scripture says not to let our right hand know what our left hand is doing. The idea with that Scripture is that we do not give asking for something else in return. We do not give hoping that our name will be made famous, but we give and we serve because the Lord has commanded that that's what we're supposed to do. Hearken back to the very first lesson. A disciple's attitude must be, yes, Lord, now what's the question? God, I belong to you in every aspect of my life. In our second lesson, we talked about how we give God our first fruits. And in the way that we serve our fellow man, this is where we put it into practice. Are you quick to get your hands dirty, or are you one who passes it down the chain? This week, my prayer is that you would truly experience God's power by helping and serving those around you.